While in Salt Lake City, we spoke with Republican Governor Gary Herbert inside the Gold Room at the Utah State Capitol.
Describe the makeup of Utah. Who lives here?
About 3 million wonderful people. We have just great people with good principles, good values. I'm the governor of a great state because we have great people here. And very diverse, from all walks of life, from a lot of different ethnic backgrounds. Part of the Mormon missionary program, in the early days, brought a lot of people from different countries to come here and settle with the Mormon pioneers. So we have a lot of European background, Latin America background, people from all over the world. It really has become Utah a melting pot of cultures here in this state.
Well, what is Utah's biggest economic driver?
We have about 7 different sectors we specialize in, all the way from aerospace, banking and finance, manufacturing, to tourism and travel, outdoor recreation, life sciences, medical device, mining, energy development. So all of our sectors are growing. That's one of the reasons why we've been recognized virtually every year by somebody as the best place in America to do business. Forbes, in fact, 3 years in a row has recognized Utah as the best place for business. Ronald Reagan's former economic advisor, Art Laffer, just named us for about the 8th year in a row as having the best economic outlook going forward. So all of our sectors are growing. It's not one above the other. It's really all of them growing together. In fact, Utah, little old Utah, is now the 4th most diversified economy in America.
Is there an event or era in Utah's history that has personally impacted you?
Well, I'm a 6th generation Utahn. My ancestors actually came across the plains with Brigham Young. And that's, my roots come from that event when they came to what was then a very arid desert climate. Someone said God-forsaken. There was just not many people here, a few Native Americans, mostly rabbits and lizards and crickets. And nobody wanted to be here. And in fact, Jim Bridger, a frontiersman of the time, told Brigham Young, I'll give you $1,000 if you can grow a bushel of corn in Utah. And it was the Utah Territory then. But they came here and they said, in spite of that, people were passing it by and saying, not in Utah do we want to settle. But Brigham Young said, this is the right place. And they said, we're going to roll up our sleeves. And used a Bible passage in the Old Testament, said, we will make the desert blossom as a rose. And they've done that. They did it. You can see the results of the efforts of many generations, of working here. And that can-do spirit, which is really the spirit of Utah, is what I draw strength from. That event of my ancestors who sacrificed a lot to provide a better life for their children, grandchildren, and eventually me, is what I want to pass on to my children, my grandchildren, so that Utah continues to be the right place for families, for individuals, for business. And frankly, it's working very well.
Well, you mentioned Brigham Young, and many associate Utah with the LDS community, and you yourself are of Mormon faith. Does that LDS population come to play in Utah politics and in your own personal politics?
I think principles and values that are commonplace in Utah are shared by many faiths. It's not just the LDS Mormon faithful, but the Catholics, the Protestants, even non-Christians, which find the values that are embodied here in Utah a welcoming atmosphere. They like it, that feels good. And people gravitate here because of those principles and values. So certainly the core has been historically the Mormon faith, but the population as it grows now, we're the 2nd fastest growing population in America, is becoming more diverse. But those principles and those values are kind of the common thread that runs through our communities here in the state of Utah.
Well, what are some of the problems facing the state of Utah?
Well, we have the same challenges that virtually any other state has. We have the challenge, though, of growth, which is unique, I think, to some states, because people are moving here. They move here because they have economic opportunity. Everybody wants to have a job. And if you don't have one in your community, then look at Utah, because we have some and we're growing. So people are coming here for economic opportunity. But they also come here for the quality of life. They like the outdoor opportunities, the outdoor recreation here. They like the neighborliness of the people. We're very friendly. We're very outgoing people here. And so the quality of life and the economic opportunity go hand in hand, which creates in-migration. And that growth pressure, coupled with we have a higher birth rate here in Utah, is probably my biggest challenge. It's a good challenge to have, because everything else is going very well in a very positive way. But how do we accommodate the growth that's coming and surely is going to continue to come to Utah is my biggest challenge.
Well, you recently unveiled your Healthy Utah plan. What is that and how does it work?
Well, we're looking for an alternative to just the same old of Medicaid expansion. The Medicaid programs of the states have been a challenge for their budgets since its inception, and we joined about 1969 to the Medicaid program. There's a lot of resistance to the Affordable Care Act in Utah, very conservative state, a lot of Republican, and so the Affordable Care Act, although it's the law of the land, is an issue for people here. So we try to find an alternative that gives a better outcome. The taxpayers' dollars are being paid into this as per the law. We think that there's a better way to redirect that rather than into Medicaid, a one-size-fits-all program, into what we call the Healthy Utah Initiative, which allows us to have other different criteria, more flexibility to deal with our own unique demographics, our unique politics, our unique culture. And I would suggest that all states ought to be doing the same kind of thing, and other states are finding different ways to address this issue. And so with Healthy Utah, we'll have some work requirements that will be a part of that effort. Similar to our TANF program, temporary aid for needy families. We'll have co-pays will be changed so that people have some obligation to pay for part of their treatment. A portion of the premium those are able to pay will pay at least a small portion of the premium. And in exchange for that, they're going to get better quality health care. They're going to get more choices, more flexibility for them for their own unique family situations, and have a better health care outcome. So respecting the taxpayers' dollars, give more choices and better outcomes is really the initiative behind what we call Healthy Utah.
Can you explain for our viewers how Healthy Utah differs from a traditional Medicaid expansion?
Medicaid expansion is just a government program that's a one-size-fits-all. I have a sister who has a special needs child who's now 30 years old, has been on Medicaid since about age 2. And she told me her husband just passed away suddenly here at age 55. And so she's left a widow with a number of kids. Surprisingly to me, she said, "Gary, I'm going to do everything I can to stay off Medicaid." I said, "Well, why, Susan? The program's designed to help people in your situation." She says, "I don't like the health care. I don't like the quality. I don't like the service that I've seen my daughter have. And so I'd like to unite my family under one health care program under some kind of private insurance." And so this Healthy Utah program will allow that to happen. So it helps make people more responsible. It's a transitional kind of an approach as opposed to people camping out with Medicaid. We have too much of that. And with a work requirement, those that can work will be required to work. We'll find them a job. The co-pays, having skin in the game, and having more choices is what you get with the Healthy Utah program, which you don't get with Medicaid.
Well, the issue of same-sex marriage continues to come to the forefront in the state of Utah. What are your views on this issue?
Well, it really doesn't matter what my views are. The people of Utah have spoken. Back in 2004, amidst a lot of discussion and debate, the people of Utah, by an overwhelming majority, over 2/3, voted to change our Constitution, to amend it and say, you define marriage as one man and one woman. Now, Utah has history with that because we were not allowed to come into the state, become a state and join the union because of polygamy, plural marriage, unless we define marriage as one man and one woman. So we have historical precedents for that, and this was modified again and improved in 2004. So it's the law. It's the law of our Constitution. It's the law of our statutes on the books. And when I was sworn in as governor, I was sworn to uphold the Constitution of the state of Utah and the laws of the land. So we are in fact going to do that. And we have people in the Attorney General's office that are on different sides of the issue, but they know that their obligation is to in fact uphold the law of the land. And that means we'll challenge any difference of that all the way to the Supreme Court until it's settled. And that's what the people would want to have. If there's confusion, if there's difference of opinion, which I understand, it's an emotional issue, but we need to finally have it settled, and that's settled through the court of law. I think it is very much a betrayal of the people to have any attorney general or any governor say, well, I've just chosen not to enforce the law because I have a different opinion. That's really a slippery slope to anarchy. We are a rule of law state, we're a rule of law country, and when the people speak, we that are designed to uphold the law should administer the law to the fullest extent until the courts tell us different, or the people change the law through the legislative process, which they are allowed to do, and in some instances that make it happen. I would much prefer it to happen that way, by the way, than have some independent judge just decide in his own mind against the will of the people.
Well, there's been a lot of debate recently over management of the state's wild horse population. Can you describe that issue for our viewers and explain your position on that as well?
Well, it is interesting that the only animal that's not on the endangered species list that's managed by the federal government is wild horses and burros. And that's a special law that was enacted in Washington, D.C. for, I'm sure, good and noble purposes. The unfortunate outcome of that is that the federal government has not managed the wild horse and burro population. And they double in population every 3 to 4 years. And they're really overgrazing the public lands. We have farmers and ranchers that have part of the multiple use of the BLM, part of the statutes requiring multiple use is for them to be able to graze their cattle out there. And as you have more and more horses and burros, it takes away from the grazing capabilities of our cattle. And so for the farmers and ranchers, that's really a big issue. So all we're suggesting to the federal government is you, under the law, are required to manage the horses and burros, do so. When you have areas that are only allowed, designed to have 300 to 500 horses and burros, and you've got now 2,000, that's not management. So we're just calling upon the federal government to manage correctly, and we're happy to help them in that effort if needs be.
Well, you've spoken about state sovereignty on these affirmation issues. Why?
Well, part of our Constitution was the concept of federalism, which is really the centralized government, the federal government in Washington, D.C., and the states as sovereign states and independent. Laboratories of democracy, they're referred to, laboratories of innovation, creativity. And unfortunately, because of the federal overreach into the domains of the state, it's encroaching upon the ability of the states to be innovators and create new ways of solving issues and problems. And I think most governors, Republican and Democrat alike, would say the federal government is getting into the state's business too much. James Madison, when he talked about the Constitution, he defined it in one of the Federalist Papers, and he said that the federal government under this Constitution has powers that are defined and few. Defined and few. He said about the states, though, they're indefinite and many. And yet we seem to have this thing backwards. We're relying more and more and more on the federal government to provide services when it should be the states and our local communities, our cities and counties that provide these services. For one thing, we're much more efficient in doing it. We find innovative ways to do things. We learn from different states. I like what they're doing in Iowa. I see what they've done in Massachusetts and say, well, that won't work in Utah. We learn from these experimentations, these pilot programs that are going on, and come up with better ways to do things. Washington, D.C. doesn't have that. Theirs is one size fits all, and it doesn't work. So, hey, state sovereignty. I mean, the states should be leading out, and there should be at least a partnership, and states should not be subservient to the Washington, D.C. establishment. We should be on a par as equal partners.
Well, what's next for the state of Utah? What would you like to accomplish during the rest of your term as governor?
Well, the goal we have is still to be the #1 economy in America and a premier global business destination. That was my first inaugural address, It's my goal, and I think every politician should have the goal of a healthy economy. If you get the economy right, everything else kind of falls into place. And it doesn't matter what your issue is. It could be education funding, it could be transportation, infrastructure needs, health and human services needs. It all becomes a lot easier if you have a healthy, growing economy. It becomes very difficult for those issues if you have a stagnant economy, which we've seen so much across the country for so many years now. And so, again, my focus will continue to be always, number one, have the most healthy economy we can in America and be a premier global business destination. Because the marketplace is now global. It's not just here in the Intermountain West or America, it's now global in nature. So we'll continue to stay the course of focusing on growing the economy.